The crowd's thunderous roar echoed through the Nexus Coliseum as another apex predator crumpled to the arena floor, its three hearts finally giving out after what the alien spectators considered an epic 37-second battle. Captain Sarah Chun stood over the massive Kytherian Death Stalker, barely breathing hard despite having just dismantled a creature that had terrorized entire star systems. She brushed a strand of dark hair from her face and looked up at the viewing box where the Galactic Entertainment Consortium's executives sat in stunned silence. "Really?" Sarah called out, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "This thing was supposed to be undefeated for 12 cycles. I've had more challenging sparring matches with my ship's maintenance droid." The Deathstalker had been impressive enough. 8 feet of chitinous armor, razor-sharp claws that could slice through battle-grade steel, and a neurotoxin that could drop a Rigelian warbeast in seconds. Unfortunately for the GC's betting pools, it had made the mistake of fighting a human. Ambassador Zexhai, a tall, reed-thin Altarian with skin like polished copper, leaned forward in his ornate chair. As the primary coordinator for what the galaxy called the Trials, though Sarah preferred Interspecies Deathmatch Tuesday, he'd witnessed 17 different apex predators fall to this singular human female over the past standard month. Captain Chen. His translator rendered his whistling language into crisp standard. "Perhaps you underestimate the magnitude of your achievements. The Deathstalker has killed 47 champions from across the spiral arm." Sarah stretched, working out a slight kink in her shoulder. "Yeah, well, maybe those champions needed better cardio." She gestured at the fallen creature. "This guy telegraphed every attack like he was sending a formal invitation. Attention, Sarah. I will now attempt to disembowel you with my left primary claw. Please prepare accordingly." The crowd, a mixture of species from across known space, buzzed with confused excitement. They'd paid premium credits to witness the legendary human's latest battle, expecting the usual spectacle of primal violence and cunning strategy that had made her the most infamous fighter in the galaxy. Instead, they'd watched her systematically dismantle another unbeatable predator with what appeared to be casual indifference. Zexhai consulted his data pad, his 4 arms moving in an elaborate gesture of frustration that his species had perfected over millennia of bureaucratic evolution. "The selection committee assures me that tomorrow's challenger will provide more adequate entertainment." "What's tomorrow's special?" Sarah asked, stepping delicately around the Deathstalker's twitching remains. Despite her casual attitude, she was careful not to disturb the creature unnecessarily. Dead or not, she respected anything that had the courage to face her in single combat. "A Void Reaper from the Andromeda Spiral," Zexhai announced with the dramatic flair that had made him the galaxy's premier arena coordinator. 12 feet of adaptive exoskeleton, quantum phase claws that can shift between dimensions, and a hunting record that spans 3 galaxy clusters. Sarah paused at the arena's exit, looking back over her shoulder. "Does it have a brain?" What? A brain? Does it think, or does it just run on instinct and evolutionary programming?" Sarah's tone was genuinely curious. "Because if it's just another big, fast, dangerous animal, we're going to have the same problem we had today." The arena fell silent except for the soft humming of the atmospheric processors. 20,000 beings from across the galaxy waited for Zexhai's response. "Captain," he said carefully, "the Void Reaper is considered the ultimate expression of predatory evolution. It has never been defeated in single combat." Sarah grinned, and something in that expression made several species in the front rows instinctively retreat. "Ambassador, with all due respect to your selection committee, you keep saying that about everything you throw at me, and I keep having to explain afterward why ultimate predator doesn't mean what you think it means." She walked toward the exit, then stopped again. "Tell you what, tomorrow before we start, ask your Void Reaper if it's ever fought something that fights back with actual strategy instead of just bigger claws and more teeth. If the answer is no, maybe we can save everyone some time and I'll just take a nap instead." The exit portal hissed shut behind her, leaving 20,000 spectators and one very frustrated ambassador to contemplate the uncomfortable possibility that they'd fundamentally misunderstood what made humans dangerous. In her quarters beneath the arena, Sarah activated a quantum communicator and sent a message to Earth's diplomatic corps. Day 31 of cultural exchange. Still trying to find something down here that can put up a decent fight. Please advise if I should start going easy on them. I think I'm accidentally traumatizing their entire entertainment industry. The response came back within minutes. Negative on going easy. Show them what humans can do. Try not to break their entire galactic economy in the process. Sarah laughed and began preparing for tomorrow's inevitable disappointment. The next morning brought an unusual level of excitement to the Nexus Coliseum. Word had spread across the local cluster about the humans' casual dismissal of the previous day's ultimate predator, and betting pools had reached record levels. The more optimistic species were wagering on how long the Void Reaper might last. The pessimists were betting on whether it would survive longer than the Deathstalker's 37 seconds. Sarah entered the arena to find Ambassador HFY hovering anxiously near the observation deck. His forearms cycling through what she'd learned were stress patterns among his people. The crowd's roar seemed more subdued today, as if they too were beginning to suspect that their understanding of predator and prey might need some adjustment. Captain Chan, HFY's translator crackled. Before we begin, I feel compelled to mention that the Void Reaper cost the GC approximately 4 million credits to acquire and transport. It has been in stasis for the journey specifically to preserve its aggressive tendencies. That's sweet of you, Sarah replied, stretching her hamstrings against the arena wall. Did you ask it my question from yesterday? What question? Whether it's ever fought something with actual strategy. HFY's copper skin shifted to a deeper bronze, the Altarian equivalent of a blush. The Void Reaper is a non-sapient entity, Captain. It doesn't engage in conversation. Sarah straightened up and fixed him with a look that had made seasoned pirates reconsider their career choices. Ambassador, that was exactly my point. The arena's central platform began to rise, revealing a containment field that hummed with barely contained energy. Inside, something massive moved in the artificial darkness. The crowd fell silent as the barriers dissolved, and the Void Reaper emerged into the arena's harsh lighting. Even Sarah had to admit it was impressive. 12 feet of flowing, adaptive exoskeleton that seemed to shift between dimensions, making it difficult to focus on directly. Its quantum phase claws flickered in and out of reality, and its hunting posture spoke of millions of years of evolutionary refinement. This was predation made manifest, death given form and purpose. The Void Reaper's sensor array locked onto Sarah immediately, recognizing her as the only viable target in the arena. It began its approach with the fluid grace of something that had never known failure, its claws shifting through quantum states as it prepared to phase through her defenses and strike at her vital organs directly. Sarah watched its approach with professional interest. Okay, that's actually pretty cool, she called up to HFY. The dimensional phasing is new. How does it work? Captain, perhaps you should focus on the battle. I am focusing. Look, it's coming straight at me in a direct line. No feints, no misdirection, no attempt to use the terrain or create multiple angles of attack. It's just gonna run at me and try to phase strike through my defenses. She sidestepped casually as the Reaper's first attack sliced through the space where she'd been standing. See? Completely predictable. The Void Reaper spun with inhuman speed, its claws phasing back into normal space to rake across where Sarah had moved. But she was already gone, circling to its blind spot with the easy efficiency of someone who'd spent years fighting things that were bigger, faster, and deadlier than she was. The problem, Sarah continued, her voice conversational despite the fact that she was now dodging quantum phase strikes that could have disintegrated a tank, is that you keep thinking in terms of individual combat capabilities. Strength, speed, special abilities, whatever. She ducked under a particularly vicious swipe and tapped the Reaper's exoskeleton just hard enough to test its density. The creature spun toward her, but she was already moving to its other flank. But humans didn't become apex predators because we're individually superior to everything else. We became apex predators because we learned to think. The Void Reaper, frustrated by its inability to pin down the small, irritatingly mobile target, began to phase in and out of dimensions rapidly, trying to confuse Sarah's tracking ability. It was a technique that had worked perfectly against every other opponent it had ever faced. Unfortunately, Sarah had spent 3 tours fighting quantum pirates who used similar tech. "Oh, that's cute," she said, pulling a small device from her belt. "Dimensional anchor. We invented these after the first few times pirates tried to phase shift away from our boarding parties." She activated the device, and the Void Reaper suddenly snapped back into normal space with what sounded like a very undignified yelp. His quantum claws flickered weakly, unable to maintain phase coherence. "And now you're just a big, fast animal with no special tricks," Sarah observed. "Which means we're back to the same problem we had yesterday." What happened next lasted exactly 43 seconds, which the crowd would later note was actually 6 seconds longer than the Deathstalker had survived. The Void Reaper never had a chance to adapt or learn from its mistakes, because Sarah didn't give it time to process what was happening to it. When it was over, she stood next to the fallen predator and looked up at the viewing box again. "Ambassador, we need to talk." Zexhi's skin had gone from bronze to a sickly yellow-green. "Captain, the selection committee assures me that tomorrow's challenger—" "No." Sarah's voice cut through his prepared speech like a plasma cutter through tin foil. "No more individual predators. No more ultimate anything. You want to give me a challenge? Start thinking like a human." She walked toward the exit, then paused. "Ask yourself this: what made humans dangerous enough that every other species in the galaxy learned our name before they learned our faces? Because I promise you, it wasn't our claws." The arena portal closed behind her, leaving the crowd in stunned silence and Ambassador Zexhi with the growing suspicion that the GC had fundamentally misunderstood what they'd gotten themselves into when they'd invited humanity to participate in the trials. In the Consortium's emergency board meeting later that day, the question was no longer whether they could find something capable of defeating the human. The question was whether they should. The Galactic Entertainment Consortium's emergency board meeting convened in the Nexus Station's most secure conference chamber, a feat of engineering that could comfortably accommodate the wildly different environmental needs of 47 distinct species. The chamber's atmosphere was a carefully balanced mixture that everyone could breathe, though several board members required supplemental filters, and the crystalline delegate from Kepler 442b had to be specially cooled to prevent sublimation. Ambassador Zexhi stood before the curved amphitheater seating, his forearms cycling through increasingly frantic stress patterns as he faced the collective leadership of the galaxy's entertainment industry. Behind him, holographic displays showed the statistical analysis of the past 32 days of human participation in the trials. The numbers were not encouraging. "Esteemed colleagues," Zexhi began, his translator working overtime to convert his whistling native language into the 46 other languages represented in the chamber. "We find ourselves confronting an unprecedented situation." Board Chairman Vrex, a massive Gorthani whose species had evolved from ambush predators, leaned forward in his specialized restraint chair. His translator rendered his subsonic growls into standard with characteristic Gorthani directness. "The human is making us look like fools, Zexhi. Our betting pools have collapsed. Half the galaxy is now wagering on how quickly our champions will die rather than whether they can win." "The situation is more complex than simple entertainment metrics," interjected Dr. Keth Era, the Consortium's chief xenobiologist, and the only being in the chamber who looked genuinely excited rather than panicked. Her insectoid features clicked with enthusiasm as she gestured toward the data displays. "Captain Chun has provided us with invaluable insights into human combat psychology. Her dismissal of our champions isn't mere arrogance. It's a fundamental difference in how her species approaches conflict." Treasurer Hexmole, whose gaseous form swirled anxiously in his containment suit, wheezed through his chemical translator. "Insights don't pay the bills, Doctor. We've lost 17 million credits on champion acquisition alone, and attendance is down 30%. Because nobody wants to watch 30-second fights. Actually," Dr. Kethera continued, her enthusiasm undimmed, "that's exactly my point. The human isn't winning because she's physically superior to our champions. In fact, detailed analysis shows she's significantly weaker than most of them in terms of raw strength, speed, and defensive capabilities." This got the board's attention. Chairman Vrex's predatory instincts, honed by millions of years of evolution, focused on the xenobiologist with uncomfortable intensity. Explain. The Deathstalker could have torn her apart with a single strike. The Void Reaper's quantum claws should have bypassed any possible defense. By every metric we use to evaluate combat effectiveness, both champions vastly outclassed Captain Chun. Dr. Kethera's excitement was palpable. But she defeated them anyway, and she did it by treating the encounters as intellectual puzzles rather than physical contests. Ambassador Zexai's skin shifted to deep bronze, embarrassment mixed with growing understanding. She asked whether our champions had brains, whether they could think strategically. Precisely. Dr. Kethera practically vibrated with academic fervor. Humans didn't evolve as apex predators in the traditional sense. They evolved as persistence hunters and tool users. They became dangerous not because they could overpower their prey, but because they could outsmart it, outlast it, and most importantly, she paused for dramatic effect, a habit she'd picked up during her years studying human academic presentations. They could learn from it. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of atmospheric processors and Treasurer Hexmole's nervous bubbling. Chairman Vrex was the first to speak. Are you suggesting that the human has been learning from our champions? Not learning from them, Dr. Kethera corrected. Learning about them. Every encounter has been a data-gathering exercise for her. She's been analyzing our selection criteria, our definition of what makes an effective predator, our entire approach to combat. Board member Silthek, whose crystalline form had been pulsing with increasingly agitated colors, suddenly flashed bright amber, the crystal being equivalent of a light bulb moment. That's why she asked if the next predator could at least try not to die so fast. She wasn't being disrespectful. She was telling us our fundamental approach is wrong. But what does she want? Wheezed Treasurer Hexmole. If individual combat isn't challenging enough, what would satisfy a human? Dr. Kethera's compound eyes gleamed. She told us, actually, yesterday after defeating the Void Reaper. She said we should start thinking like a human if we wanted to challenge her. 2 days later, Sarah entered the arena to find something she hadn't expected. Nothing. The familiar central platform was empty, the containment fields inactive. Instead of the usual thunderous crowd noise, the Coliseum hummed with an undercurrent of anticipation that felt different. More focused, more intelligent. The viewing boxes were fuller than they'd been in weeks, but the atmosphere had shifted from bloodthirsty excitement to something closer to academic curiosity. Ambassador Zexai's voice echoed from speakers strategically placed throughout the arena. Captain Chun, before we begin today's trial, the selection committee wishes to acknowledge that our previous approach may have been inadequate to the task of providing you with meaningful challenge. Sarah walked to the center of the empty arena, her boots clicking against the polished Durasteel floor. I'm listening. Dr. Kethera, our chief xenobiologist, has suggested that we've been thinking about this incorrectly. We've been trying to find something that can defeat you in individual combat, when we should have been trying to find something that can outthink you. This actually got Sarah's attention. She stopped walking and looked up at the viewing box, where she could see Zexai's familiar copper-colored form gesturing with all 4 arms. Go on. Today's challenge is not a predator in the traditional sense. It is, according to our consultants, the closest thing we could devise to a human opponent without actually using another human. The arena floor began to shift, reconfiguring itself into something that looked more like an urban environment than a gladiatorial pit. Buildings rose from hidden compartments, streets formed between them, and within moments Sarah found herself standing in what appeared to be a small city. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted beings, Zexai announced to the crowd, today Captain Chun will face the Nexus Advanced Combat Intelligence, an artificial construct designed by the galaxy's finest military strategists, programmed with every known combat doctrine, and equipped with adaptive learning protocols. Sarah whistled appreciatively as she surveyed the urban terrain around her. Now we're talking. What are the parameters? The combat intelligence has been given access to a variety of standard galactic military hardware and has been tasked with preventing you from reaching the central spire. A tall structure appeared at the far end of the simulated city, perhaps half a mile away. It has 30 minutes to study your initial approach before engagement begins, and it will modify its tactics in real time based on your actions. And what's it learned about me so far? Sarah asked, already beginning to analyze sightlines and potential cover points. There was a pause before Zexhai responded, and Sarah could hear the reluctant admiration in his translated voice. Everything, Captain. It has access to detailed analysis of every encounter you've had in this arena, complete tactical breakdowns of your decision-making patterns, and psychological profiles compiled by our xenopsychology department. Sarah grinned. Finally, someone did their homework. The 30-minute preparation period gave her time to explore the simulated environment and quickly confirmed her suspicions. This wasn't just a random urban layout. The combat intelligence had designed the terrain specifically to counter human tactical advantages. Streets were too wide to provide easy cover, buildings were too tall to climb quickly, and the approach to the central spire had been designed to funnel any attacker into carefully prepared kill zones. More importantly, she could feel something studying her as she moved. Not the passive sensor sweeps of the previous predators, but active, intelligent analysis. Somewhere in this artificial city, something was watching her every movement and learning. When the engagement timer reached 0, Sarah had positioned herself in what appeared to be a tactically disadvantageous location. Standing in the middle of the widest street, completely exposed, with no cover within 50 meters in any direction. The combat intelligence's first mistake was assuming this was an error. The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously. Suppressing fire from elevated positions designed to pin her down, a ground-based assault unit moving to her position, and what she assumed was some kind of area denial weapon preparing to cut off her retreat routes. It was professionally coordinated, tactically sound, and demonstrated a clear understanding of human combat doctrine. It was also exactly what she'd expected. Sarah moved not toward cover, but toward the incoming ground unit, using a technique that her instructors had called aggressive unpredictability. Instead of behaving like a rational tactical commander, she acted like someone who was either completely insane or operating on information her opponent didn't have. The combat intelligence paused its attack for 0.3 seconds, an eternity in combat time, trying to process this unexpected behavior. In that moment of hesitation, Sarah reached the ground unit and discovered what she'd hoped. It was sophisticated enough to avoid firing on its own forces. What followed was 15 minutes of the most intellectually engaging combat Sarah had experienced since leaving Earth. The combat intelligence adapted continuously, learning from each exchange and modifying its approach in real time. When she used urban terrain to break sight lines, it repositioned its assets. When she improvised weapons from environmental materials, it adjusted its threat assessment protocols. When she feinted toward one approach and switched to another, it began predicting her deceptions. But it made one critical error. It assumed that learning about Sarah Chun meant it could predict Sarah Chun. Humans, as Dr. Kethera had noted, were adaptation specialists. But more than that, they were unpredictability specialists. Sarah had spent the first 10 minutes of the engagement letting the combat intelligence learn her patterns, deliberately establishing predictable behaviors that it could model and counter. Then she threw them all away and did something completely different. The crowd watched in fascination as Sarah abandoned all conventional tactical doctrine and began moving through the simulated city like someone who'd completely lost her mind. She climbed buildings in the most inefficient ways possible, took routes that led away from her objective, and at one point stopped to examine what appeared to be decorative architecture for no apparent tactical reason. The combat intelligence, designed to counter rational strategic thinking, found itself completely unprepared for an opponent who had decided to stop being rational. Sarah reached the central spire with 4 minutes to spare on the engagement timer, and for the first time since arriving at the Nexus Coliseum, she was actually breathing hard. Now that, she called up to the viewing box, was almost fun. The crowd's response was unlike anything the arena had ever heard before. Not the bloodthirsty roar of spectators watching violence, but the appreciative applause of beings who had just witnessed something genuinely remarkable. Ambassador Zexhai's voice carried a note of what might have been pride. Captain Chun, on behalf of the selection committee, I must ask, was that adequate to your requirements? Sarah considered the question seriously. It was a good start. Your combat intelligence is impressive, better tactical analysis than most military AIs I've worked with. But it made the same mistake everyone else has been making. Which is, it tried to outthink me using my own rules. But the thing about humans, Ambassador, is that we're really good at changing the rules when the current ones stop working for us. She began walking toward the exit, then paused. Tell your programmers they did good work, though. That was the first fight I've had in weeks where I actually had to try. As the arena portal closed behind her, Dr. Kethera turned to her fellow board members with the expression of someone who had just made a profound discovery. I believe, she said quietly, we may have been asking the wrong question this entire time. Chairman Vrex fixed her with his predatory stare. Explain. We've been trying to find something that can defeat the human. But what if the real question is, what would it take for the human to defeat herself? The implications of that question would keep the selection committee busy for the next several days, and would ultimately lead to the most dangerous trial Captain Sarah Chun had ever faced. On the morning of what the Nexus station's betting pools were calling the final trial, Sarah arrived at the arena to find Ambassador Zexhai waiting for her personally, something that hadn't happened since her first day. His copper skin carried undertones she'd learned to recognize as deep concern, and his forearms moved in patterns that suggested he was wrestling with a difficult decision. Captain Chen, he said without preamble, the selection committee has prepared what we believe will be your ultimate challenge. But before we proceed, I feel obligated to ask, are you certain you wish to continue? Sarah studied his expression carefully. In the weeks she'd been here, Zexhai had evolved from viewing her as an entertaining curiosity to something approaching genuine respect, and she'd learned to trust his judgment about galactic politics. What's different about today? We took your advice, he replied. We stopped trying to outfight you and started trying to outthink you. Dr. Kethera believes we've succeeded, but... He paused, his arms cycling through what she now recognized as the Altarian equivalent of uncertainty. The challenge we've prepared may be more dangerous than anything you've faced, not because it might kill you, but because it might change you. This was interesting. Sarah had faced death dozens of times in her military career and never lost sleep over it. But the possibility of being changed by an encounter was something else entirely. Show me. The arena had been reconfigured again, but this time into something that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Instead of an alien environment or simulated urban terrain, she found herself looking at a perfect replica of the USS Perseverance's bridge, her ship, down to the coffee stain on her captain's chair and the lucky charm her engineer had welded to the navigation console. Standing at the tactical station, wearing her uniform and her face, was another Sarah Chun. Captain, the duplicate said, turning with a smile that Sarah recognized as her own. I've been waiting for you. Ambassador Zexhai's voice carried from speakers hidden throughout the replica bridge. The selection committee's final solution was inspired by Dr. Kethera's observation about human unpredictability. If the most dangerous human opponent is one who can change the rules, then perhaps the only adequate challenge would be a human who knows which rules you're going to change. Sarah walked slowly around the bridge, noting details that only someone with access to her personal files could have known to include. Impressive reproduction. How much of my psychological profile did you give her? All of it, the duplicate replied. Every tactical decision, every personal preference, every documented choice you've made since joining Starfleet, plus a few extrapolations based on human psychological models. But, Sarah said thoughtfully, you're not actually me, are you? The duplicate's smile widened. No, I'm something much more dangerous. I'm you without the limitations. What limitations? Conscience. Hesitation, the need to protect others. The duplicate gestured around the replica bridge. I have all your tactical knowledge, all your adaptive capabilities, all your creativity, but I don't have to worry about collateral damage or rules of engagement or whether my actions are ethical. I'm what you could be if you stopped caring about anything except winning. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the arena's climate control. This wasn't just a tactical challenge. It was a mirror being held up to show her what she might become if she lost herself in the pursuit of victory. The parameters are simple, Ambassador Zexhai announced. Standard hand-to-hand combat, but with a twist. Every time one of you gains an advantage, the environment will shift to negate it. The only way to win is to consistently out-adapt your opponent. The bridge around them flickered and began to change, cycling through different environments every few seconds. Urban terrain, jungle, Arctic wasteland, zero gravity, underwater, alien landscape Sarah didn't recognize. The duplicate moved with each change, adapting instantly to new conditions while maintaining perfect tactical positioning. "You see the problem," the duplicate said conversationally as they circled each other through shifting realities. "You keep trying to be the good guy, even here. You're analyzing my capabilities, looking for weaknesses, trying to find a way to win without causing unnecessary damage. But I already know you're going to do that, because I am you." She attacked, and Sarah found herself fighting someone who anticipated her every move because they shared her tactical instincts. Worse, the duplicate fought without restraint, using techniques that Sarah knew but had never employed because they were too brutal, too final, too much. "This is what the galaxy fears about humans," the duplicate continued as they grappled through another environmental shift. "Not that you're individually superior, but that you never stop adapting, never stop learning, never stop finding new ways to win. And eventually, you stop caring about anything except the winning itself." Sarah managed to break free and create some distance, her mind racing. The duplicate was right about one thing. She was holding back, trying to find a solution that didn't require becoming something she didn't want to be. But every tactical doctrine she knew said that was a luxury she couldn't afford against an opponent of equal capability. "You want to know what makes humans really dangerous?" the duplicate asked, seeming to read her thoughts. "It's not our adaptability or our intelligence or our persistence. It's that we're willing to sacrifice everything, including ourselves, to achieve our objectives. The question is, what are you willing to sacrifice to win here?" The environment shifted again, and Sarah found herself on a platform suspended above what appeared to be an endless void. The duplicate stood across from her, perfectly balanced, perfectly prepared. "Here's the thing about mirrors," Sarah said quietly. "They can only show you what's already there. They can't show you what you choose to become." She attacked, but not the way the duplicate expected. Instead of using her full tactical knowledge, instead of employing every technique in her arsenal, instead of adapting to match her opponent's capabilities, she did something that no psychological profile could have predicted. She chose to fight like a human being rather than like a perfect tactical machine. The duplicate, programmed with all of Sarah's knowledge but none of her growth as a person, couldn't adapt to an opponent who deliberately chose suboptimal tactics for ethical reasons. It was prepared for Sarah the soldier, Sarah the tactician, Sarah the adaptive predator. It wasn't prepared for Sarah the woman who had learned that winning wasn't always the most important thing. When it was over, the duplicate looked up at her with genuine confusion. "You could have won earlier. You had at least 3 opportunities to end this fight using techniques you know but chose not to use. Why?" Sarah helped her defeated mirror self to her feet, an action that caused murmurs of surprise from the crowd. "Because the person who would have used those techniques isn't someone I want to be." The arena fell silent as the implications of that statement sank in. Here was a human who had just defeated her own tactical perfection by choosing to remain imperfect. Ambassador Zexhi's voice, when it came, carried a tone of deep respect. "Captain Chun, the selection committee concedes. We cannot devise a challenge that you cannot overcome, because the most dangerous thing about humans isn't that they always find a way to win. It's that they get to choose what winning means." Sarah looked around the arena one final time, then up at the viewing box. "Ambassador, it's been educational. But I think it's time I got back to my ship." As she walked toward the exit, the crowd began something unprecedented in the history of the Galactic Entertainment Consortium. A standing ovation not for violence witnessed, but for wisdom displayed. Later, in her final report to Earth's diplomatic corps, Sarah wrote, "Mission accomplished. The galaxy now understands that humans are dangerous not because we're better predators than everyone else, but because we're the only species that can choose not to be predators when it matters. Recommend we use this reputation responsibly." The response from Earth came back within hours. "Understood and agreed. Come home, Captain. We have other challenges that need a human touch." As the transport ship pulled away from Nexus Station, Sarah watched the receding lights and smiled. For the first time in weeks, she was looking forward to fighting something that might actually surprise her. After all, the most dangerous opponents were always the ones that could learn and grow, even if that opponent was herself.